Good evening, Australia. Nice to have you with us on Raycom TV. Special big shout out, of course, to the LEMAC customers who've been obviously waiting excitedly for this moment to happen. I'm Andy Clements. I'm Commercial Director at Raycom in the UK.
And I'm Pyers Easton. I'm a Managing Director, also the sort of technical person really behind the scenes.
Okay, so a little bit of an introduction to Raycom first of all, just so you know who we are. We've been established in the UK as a company for over 30 years, supplying audio products to the pro market, particularly for initially for the live sound market, and then in the last probably 10 to 15 years, more concentrating on TV and film and broadcast, although we're now going back and doing a little bit in the live market as well. But there are around 12 of us here in the UK, and we're supplying all the key dealers and distributors. So once again, still concentrating on pro audio products. Pyers, a little bit about Wisycom maybe.
Yeah, well, Wisycom have been around for quite a few decades now, and certainly in the last 20 years they've become very big players into the wireless market, developing a load of new products that really have pushed the boundaries of technology to an enormous extent, culminating in the product we're about to tell you about now. But before we get into that, let's watch a short video showing you the headquarters of Wisycom and some of the people there and the equipment.
Yeah, so there we go, a little bit about Wisycom. That's their new factory. I think they moved into it last year. Fabulous place.
Fabulous opening party as well.
Yeah, fabulous opening party, and
the bits that we
lots
remember.
of space to expand and you know, increase their productivity there. It really is a good facility. So yeah, we're going to move now into this presentation on the MCR54 today. You know, this is our first live stream, so you'll have to excuse us if we're making a few little glitchy errors now and again, but we have practiced a bit and we think it's going to work. And the first live stream, obviously going down to Australia, and obviously supporting our customers that we're going to be picking up down there. You know, Wisycom and the MCR54, very new products, and the idea of
Raycom Pacific is fairly new as well.
And Raycom Pacific, yeah, you know, just over a year old. It's all quite new, but we know that you guys down there are going to love this product, and this it was a great opportunity to be able to launch properly in Australia with a product that that the sound guys are going to love. So let's talk about the MCR54. We're going to go through some of the main features of the product, and what we'd encourage. We've got, you know, the opportunity to do some live questions and answers all the way through the presentation. I'll be keeping an eye on it here to make sure that we're answering as many of the questions as we can, as quickly as we can, but please do feel free to put some questions in. It'll be nice to see them. So first of all, let's talk about the MCR54 then, Pyers. Yeah, what is it?
Well, it's as you can see it down here. It's a slot-in style receiver. So the shape is defined by the good old camera slot. But by being that size, it makes it quite small. It also means that it can be slotted into cameras, obviously, and it can be slotted into various third-party slot-ins that we're more about which later. What I'd say about it is it's 4 channels, which is truly remarkable because it's got actually 8 receivers in it. So it's 4 channels of RF, and it has AES outputs. It has a top output that can be either analog AES. It's got top and bottom RF inputs, and it's incredibly flexible.
Yeah, and it's a Wisycom product. Let's talk about its performance. Its range.
Well, yes. The range actually is truly astonishing. I mean, I've been involved in RF for about well over 40 years, since I was a kid, and I know a fair bit about the RF design and how things work. And we did a walk test of the MCR54, which incidentally, if you look down below, we've posted a link to it, which was a sort of recorded as live walk test where we went off from Raycom towers here in Easton in the UK. And saw what the range was, and I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. To try and make it a bit more interesting, we didn't really test it beforehand, so we just sort of made it up as we went along. But the range is incredible. So the sensitivity is fantastic. It's got really good filtering on it, so that you don't get much interference from other powerful transmitters nearby. So these filters track with the tuning. So yeah, the range is fantastic. The sound quality is fantastic. It's really amazing, and it has a very wide tuning range as well. It covers the whole, for Australia, it covers the whole 520 to 694 tuning range without any gaps. And it also has some other frequencies as well that it can tune to, including the DME band, which is a very high frequency band, 960 to 1162 megahertz, which is licensable in the UK at the moment. But because it's actually the aeronautical band, pretty much every aircraft up there in the sky has got equipment. In fact, probably every aircraft has got equipment on that frequency band, so that's not going anywhere anytime soon, and it's global, so we really expect that's going to be something that is going to be used to take the pressure off highly congested UHF spectrum that's being taken away left, right and centre from global users. Yeah,
and I mean, talking about taking up spectrum, we know it's a concern, very much a concern in Europe, and I'm sure starting to become a concern in Australia. Have Wisycom, well, I know how Wisycom, but let's tell everybody how Wisycom have dealt with this issue of less spectrum, more radio mics.
Well, they have, apart from making their equipment the widest tuning range anywhere, so you have access to as many frequencies as you could imagine. They've also introduced a wideband, narrowband setting. Now, a lot of people have produced products that offer high density in the digital domain. That normally involves reducing the power enormously, not reducing the RF bandwidth, and doing all kinds of other tricks that means you actually get a poorer performance when you go into narrowband. Wisycom have done it very differently. The actual RF bandwidth in the receiver is reduced from 200 to 100 kilohertz, and that means not only you can get twice as many channels into the same amount of spectrum, which is obviously gold to anybody who's struggling out there. And this is the bonus, rather than having to do that at the expense of performance and range, you actually there is an improvement in range, because you get by reducing the RF bandwidth to 50%, you get a 3 dB increase in receiver sensitivity, which, if you do the maths, actually means that you get 41.4%, to be precise, more range in free space. If you've got buildings and other obstacles in the way, it doesn't quite work like that. But if you were in an ideal free space situation, you would actually get twice as many channels and over 40% more range. So and with no reduction in sound quality. As I say, when it's done digitally, you get a loss of range, and also in many cases the sound quality is reduced because the digital compression has to go up to reduce the bit rate. Yeah,
so we're getting more channels into the same space. Yeah. And we're getting longer range at the same time.
Yes, and
what's not to like?
The receiver is switchable between wide and narrow band, and we're going to come on to the transmitters in a minute, but the transmitters can also now be switched between wide and narrow band. So you have the choice, and if you go narrowband, as I say, you could squeeze about 30 into a 7 megahertz Australian channel. You could get about 30 channels or thereabouts. Because the other thing to mention is that the transmitters and the receivers are designed to not produce any significant intermodulation between transmitters or between transmitters in the receiver. So what that means is you can actually stripe a channel every 200 kilohertz when it's in narrowband mode. So literally you don't have to worry about intermod plans anymore. You just turn up tune a transmitter every 200 kilohertz, and as I say, I think it works out somewhere near 30 channels into a 7 megahertz Australian TV channel.
Yeah, so very convenient when you're managing the spectrum and working out where you're putting your frequencies. And talking about managing the RF signal, let's talk about filtering.
Well, yes, as I mentioned, the Wisycom does have built-in tunable filtering that actually tracks with the tuning of the frequency. So that means that other high-level signals that might be adjacent to the signals we're trying to receive are very highly rejected. So this is. I mean, make no mistake, the amount of technology that has had to be employed to get 4 channels, which means 8 receivers, because it's true diversity. I would like to emphasise that point, that it uses 8 discrete receivers in this tiny package to actually achieve what they've achieved. And the technology, it's absolute cutting edge technology that's come from aerospace, cellular phone technology. I mean, when you actually see the board and the way it's constructed inside, I've never seen anything else like it in this industry. I've only ever seen it in, as I say, aerospace and satellite technology. So the Wisycom have done something absolutely
it's like
amazing.
jewellery. It is fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a lot of nanotechnology in there. I mean, my RF expertise, as I say, goes back like 40-something years, where a coil was like, you could see the coil windings. Now you need a microscope to even see the component, let alone the coil. And the same with capacitors and all sorts of other components that were traditionally much bigger.
Shall we have a look at the menus now?
And let's put my glasses.
We're not going to go through each feature in the menu and go through it step by step, but I think we'll show you some examples of the key menus, and you can see the clarity of the menu as well.
Yeah, well, what I would emphasise, please do ask questions. This is a live stream. We are ready to answer questions. So I'm not going to go into huge detail because it might get a bit boring if I were to literally show you every single menu item and how to adjust it and everything. So I'm just going to do a little overview. So what we're going to do here, we'll talk about the top menu first. What you can see there, you've got the 4 channels on display. Now there's going to be a firmware update soon that will allow you to change the home screen, if you like, if you want to have less information but make it larger so it's easier to see and choose what you see and various other things like that. But at the moment, you can see there the 4 there's sort of four quadrants in the display there that give you basic information about the group and the channel you're tuned to, the actual frequency, and what the squelch setting is. You've then got an RF bar graph going up to the right hand side, and there's an audio bar graph below. We're not actually receiving anything on this at the moment. We're using a different receiver for the wireless that Andy and I are using for the presentation. But
can I just cut in a minute, because I think it's probably the best to do, because we've got a question coming from Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
Oh, hello, Patrick.
Is the MCR54 SDR based?
SDR? No, it's not.
You've beaten me on that one, but Pyers knows. You see.
No, SDR is where you basically convert RF into the digital domain at quite an early stage, and then deal with all of the bandwidth processing and demodulation all in the digital domain. I mean that's great for sort of scanning receivers and where you need a receiver that can receive any kind of modulation, and it can be configured to be anything you want. But the downside is, because you're converting the RF into the digital domain at an early stage, it's very susceptible to overload. Anybody who's ever worked with digital audio versus with analog audio on a tape, for instance, with a tape it's fairly it's fairly gentle once you get into overload, but with digital, once you hit 0 dBFS, which is basically all ones, you can't go any more than that. And that's the problem with software-defined radio SDR, which is where effectively you could have multiple RF signals coming in. It can't differentiate between them. It's trying to digitize that whole spectrum, and one of those signals causes it to overload, and you've lost everything. I mean, that really would be a very dangerous place to go, to be honest, in the broadcast world, and inappropriate. So I'm pleased to say no. It's the best of both worlds. There's a lot of DSP in there, but all of the important RF handling is done in the analog domain. And the same with using SAW filters where appropriate, and tunable inductive capacitive filters. So the large signal handling of it isn't compromised by digitizing it. The digital work is done after the demodulation, effectively.
There we go, Patrick. I'm bet you're pretty sure asked that question now, and so the short answer is no.
No, that is a really good, very
good point.
If that's the sound of the questions we get tonight, I have to say I'm going to really enjoy this.
Good. So, anyway, back to the menus.
So back to the menus. So yeah, we've seen the top menu. I've probably talked exhaustively about that. So then we've got, we go into the other menus. You've got a preset menu there. You can store a complete setup of the whole receiver and recover it later. So if you're working on different jobs or you're renting it out, you can always go back to a default setting or go to a specific setting and that's all the parameters that I'm about to show you will be stored. So in setup, I'll go through that kind of quickly. You can turn receivers off if you're not using them. That will save battery power and reduce the amount of real estate taken up on the display when you're in the home screen. Within the receivers, you can edit each receiver 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can change the name. You can do that either from here or you can do it from the software, which we're going to come to in a minute. In frequency, here you can select the channel and group. You've got 2,200 channels in total. It's 40 groups of 60 channels each. And if it's an unlocked channel, again, I'll come to how you lock and unlock channels later, but if it's been stored as an unlocked channel, you can actually directly input a frequency. In this case, we can just go up and down the channels or select a different group. As I say, I'm not going to go into too much detail. If you want more detail, please do ask. Wide, narrow, I was talking about just now, that selects the RF bandwidth of the receiver and the type of modulation it's expecting to get from the transmitter. Now, here's one that I will talk a little bit more about. This is Compander. Now, we are going to talk about the Wisycom transmitter shortly, but some people may want to buy this receiver for the compact 4-channel format that it's in and use them with their existing transmitters for a time. So this will actually work with, well, you've got two Compander modes, ENC and ENR Wizy, which are the two Wisycom modes, which I can go into more detail if anyone's interested about the difference between those. Then we've got Sen, which is Sennheiser. That's the high-end Sennheiser setting. That's like an engineering one, really. That's a Sennheiser with no de-emphasis, but that's not really of much use for existing transmitters. That's a UHFR. That's a Shure UHFR compatibility. Evo is Evolution Sennheiser. Well, Flat is sort of an engineering one, and then we're back there. They're also Companders for audio limited, which aren't fitted in there, and Micron that are available, and Q5.
And Q5X.
And Q5 for their products. So carrying on down the menu, squelch mode. Now this uses quite a different type of squelch to most receivers. It looks not just at the signal level, it looks at the signal level on the channel quality and the signal to noise ratio of the signal it's receiving. So that means effectively rather than setting actual numbers, you just set whether you want it long range. And to be honest, I normally use it on that because even in long range mode, when it drops out, it's still got a perfectly broadcast quality signal in my opinion, and you get the maximum range. So I tend to leave it on that. Or you can have normal, or you can have a user setting, which I'll come to when I get to the software. That's where you can actually set all of your own parameters. That's like getting under the hood really and adjusting all of the individual parameters. But I will come to that when we get to the software. Or you can have squelch off. As I say, long range is my preferred setting.
Just a question coming in here, Piers, which I guess a question that we were going to expect in Australia because we know which products are currently very popular. Electro. It's not in the menu.
Okay, yes, that's another really good question. You can use it with Electro, but because Electro's digital hybrid Compander is patented, there are issues obviously with emulating that. So the way to work with Electrosonics is through mode 3 setting on the Electrosonics. That sets the Electrosonics in Sennheiser compatibility, and then you set SEN on the Compander in the MCR54.
And that's something that's been happening already in the UK with Electro users in the UK, and we're
and in Australia.
Reporting,
shout out to our technical guy down at Raycom Pacific, Quinn. He's been doing some demonstrations, and I gather the performance of the system with it in this compatibility mode is very good. So if you've got Electrosonics transmitters, you do have an option there.
Make Electro look like a Sennheiser, and then everybody's happy. But no, it works very well. Yeah, thanks for that question, Patrick. It's a good one.
Okay, so where did I get to? Audio out. Here you can set the maximum audio output level. the AS3 level, which you wouldn't normally want to change, signal phase. You can also generate a calibration tone. Then you've got a sync mode, which syncs the receiver with your transmitter if you're using an electro transmitter. Then we'll go down to other modes. There's a scan mode where you can scan the channels that, or the frequency range that you've got set and display the results on the screen. There's also a scan mode from the software, which I'll show you a bit later. What else? You can select the headphone level from there. You can change things on the display. Now in advanced audio, this is where you can route the audio. You can enable AES or not, or have it not enabled. So you can have AES, all 4 channels coming out of the bottom socket as AES or as analog. Or you can also select what the aux socket on the top here outputs. There's a underneath there's a 5-pin. I'll just show you on the screen. There's a 5-pin TA, so you can select the audio, which of the channels come out there. Because in some cases you might have it plugged into an accessory that only outputs channels 1 and 2 from the base. So you then might need to take channels 3 and 4 out the top, and you can also independently set the level for the aux output. Activation code, this is where as Wisycom bring out new compounder modes, compatibility modes with different brands of transmitter, you can activate that using a code that they give you. If effectively you put that code in and then it opens that up in the DSP for you. So it's kind of future-proof in a way. It's a bit like, I don't know, like a Tesla car or something. You know, you buy it as one thing and then a few years later, it's like a completely different car or a completely different receiver because the firmware and the software has completely changed the operation of it and made it better.
Just another question came in there. The MCR54, can it work with different brands of TX? And this is exactly what we're just saying. It's it's a key feature of the MCR54 and other Wisycom receivers that. The ability to go off to the transmitter that perhaps you need for a specific job. You know, we mentioned Q5X before with their very waterproof transmitters, or you particularly enjoy using a Electro SSM because of its size and format. You know, the Wisycom receivers are there and open and saying, you know, come on in. You know, the quality will be the same. You know, from my limited understanding of the technical world, but the receiver is. In the whole sort of RF path, the sensitivity and capability of the receiver is key. Transmitters play their part, of course, but the receiver is key. So being able to use the transmitters that you love already, I'm sure you'll come to love the Wisycom transmitters as well. But the ones, particularly that may be your favourites at the moment, being able to use those in a 4-channel format is a big plus.
So we were
just
so we haven't mentioned the bases, have we? Actually, the bases for the
no. So we've got some props. There we go. It's always nice to have. So we're kind of done with the menus now, unless anybody's got any specific questions on the menus, and then we can go back and have
or any of the parameters that I mentioned. If you want them explained a bit more, please let us know because we're here to do that for you.
So. MCR54, it's brought in this wonderful RF signal, it's turned it into audio. How do we get it out from the MCR54?
Well, yes, there's there are 3 options available. One is this, which is the sort of the freestanding base, if you like. So you can't see
the bag base.
Well, you can see it on that, but it basically gives you a high-res. Or Hirose, I think is the proper way of saying it, to DC input. I prefer high-res actually, so we'll call it high-res. So you get your 12-volt DC input, which actually works from 5 to I think about 18 volts. So you can run it off like a mobile phone battery pack, and it draws about I think 1.8 watts. So it'll run for a fair time off a decent battery pack. You've then got two TA5 outputs. Each one of those can be either 2 analog channels or 4 AES channels. Well, 2 AES channels, which is 4 audio channels. So that's like in a bag system. We've then got this, which is the 25-way D type, which is the IKSS. Now that's the super slot compatible. This is the this is probably the going to be the most popular, because a lot of people are using it with external accessories. So we're going to talk about those in a minute, but this is where you would plug it into a sleeve that would then be attached to your mixer, and this will bring out all of the functions and the data connection, and in the case of sound devices, you can control it from the mixer. And pass all the audio through. So that's a sort of a slotting one. Then there's a Sony, which is another D-type, but this is it's really specifically only for Sony cameras.
Yeah. I mean, what's nice about these as well now, they do swap very, very easily. Swapping bases on receivers can be a bit tricky, but these literally plug in and slide out very, very quickly without any sort of fiddliness. If you did have to, in a hot situation, move from a bag base onto a camera base, it's nice to know that they come backwards and forwards quite quickly.
As long as you've got a screwdriver.
Yeah, you need a screwdriver,
that's the only thing you need.
But that's all you need now. Not too much patience, which you've perhaps needed in the past. Peter, hi. A question in from Peter William.
Hi, Peter.
He's talking about when you're using the electro transmitters with as we said, putting it into Sennheiser mode. This is going to be a lot of questions about electro, I guess, using it with the MCR54 because of the product's popularity in the region. But he's saying you lose telemetry.
Well, yeah, at the moment you lose battery telemetry, but that may come at some point with a firmware update, either for the Electro or the Wisycom. I don't know, but at the moment, yes, you do lose the battery telemetry in that mode. But that's all. In every other respect, it's absolutely.
But he's also going to say that the Sennheiser Shure Mo Q5X, I think the telemetry's looked after there, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
With specific modes for specific transmitter brands, you get a full transfer of information. Hope that answers the question. So we've talked a bit about bases. Where are we now? We spoke about compandas already. Remote control of this.
Yeah, well,
this is the next stage, I guess.
The MCR54 basically has full remote control options. I'll show you the PC-based remote control in a moment, but I'll also mention that it has Bluetooth 5 built in. Bluetooth 5 is a very long-range, high reliability, low power format that enables you to communicate with mobile phones, tablets. At the moment, the MCR54 is really very new. We've only had one shipment, then the second shipment ever in the world is just about to come out. The firmware is catching up, and the software is catching up, and there is going to be an extensive piece of software that will run on mobile phones and tablets for Apple iOS and Android. Options that will be coming. Unfortunately, I can't quite show you yet because it's not ready. I mean, we've actually only got Apple devices for a start, and it's in the developer phase with Apple, so it's only available to developers at the moment. But that is coming. But the other thing you can do with the MCR54 is connect it to a computer with a cable. We've got a USB-C connected to it at the moment, which is connected to the computer, which is powering it, and it's also providing a data connection. So yeah, if we switch over to my computer screen now, it is a PC piece of software. They keep promising a Mac version, but it's not here yet. As you can probably see from the desk, I'm running it on a Mac. I'm running it under Parallels. It's actually quite an old version of Parallels even, which I've not bothered to update yet, and it works absolutely fine. So what you see here on the screen, you've got the 4 receivers have come up, and what it's showing there is there's no signal, obviously, or no audio because we've got no transmitter connected to it. But if we go to settings, this is where we can change the settings. You can change the receiver name, you can choose the channel or channel group that you're using, which in fact I'll bring that up now because that makes sense. So here you can see what we've got is it's brought up all the channels that are in the receiver. So you've got group 0 to group 39, so you've got 40 groups there, and you can name each group. So you could call it for a particular site you were working at, or a particular client, or a particular country you were going to use it in. You could set, or you could already preset all of the frequencies and channels for that use. And then you can add a bit of an extra description that doesn't appear on the screen on the receiver, just for your own use if you want to put a bit more detail. This is where you then set the actual frequencies for the channels. Now you enter them in kilohertz, so there's no decimal point. But yeah, I mentioned that because some people get confused. They try and put a decimal point in, it doesn't like it. So you enter it in whole kilohertz effectively. Then you'll notice that some of these frequencies. So you've got earlier you've got 60. 0 to 59, you've got 60 channels per group. Now, each channel can be set to be either one of three things. It can be hidden, which that one was. Now that makes it purple. Now when I turn that off, that makes it green, which basically means it's unlocked completely. You can then change that from the receiver panel, but most people want the frequencies to be either hidden or locked. So once they're programmed in, sort of, people with getting finger trouble when they're getting nervous can't accidentally change the frequency and then get all over the place. But hidden, basically, if it's purple, means that it doesn't even show up in the menu. If you select that group on the receiver, that won't even show up. So I mean, in theory, you could hide every channel apart from one, so that each group was only one channel. Then you could hide. You can also hide groups, for instance. You could hide an entire group. If I just click on the right place. Getting a bit confused there. Yes, so you can hide a group. So you could have just one channel in one group visible. That if you wanted to make it completely idiot-proof, but most people don't want to do that, as I said. But so that's the hide option. Then you've got the lock option. Now, lock means that you can program the frequency in here, but once you've sent it to the receiver, you can't change it. And you can save these complete frequency plans to your computer, recover them, open them from your computer, and then load them to the receiver. So that's write to device, read from device. So basically that gives you the opportunity to edit and compile these frequency plans quite quickly for whatever you need. So that's if anybody's got any questions about that, there's probably a whole load of questions that people want to ask about how you program frequencies. Everything, I can come back to that. Then we've got I mentioned just now about the squelch. You can select normal, long range, or user. I've got it set to long range. Now if you set it to user, you're then in a position where you can change specific parameters like the RF squelch. Now that's the RF level that you have to reach in order for the squelch to open, and the amount of signal to noise ratio you want before it opens the squelch, and also the squelch on delay, which can be useful if you've got like some interference that might sometimes open the squelch. You want the squelch to wait maybe 100 milliseconds before opening, or 500 milliseconds. So in other words, you turn the transmitter on, it gets the signal, and then it waits to have a stable signal for a while before it opens. But in most cases, people, I would suggest, would just use the presets, which are more than adequate, because it uses a whole range of parameters to determine whether to open the squelch. And as I found it very reliable, even on long range, which is where I mentioned again, we've done that walk test that we've got a link to below. That was done using long range, and you'll hear that when it does drop out, it's still a pretty good audio. And diversity mode, that can be either receive signal strength or channel quality. That's basically, it either decides which of the two antennas to use in the diversity based on actual received signal, or what the actual carrier to noise is based on in other words, it looks at the level and the signal to noise and makes a decision based on that.
It's an important point, actually. We didn't perhaps dwell on too much earlier on. Diversity, antenna diversity. I mean, this is where this 4 channels is very clever as well, isn't it? I mean, maintaining diversity.
Well, yes. I mean, as I said, it's got 8 receivers in it, so it's true diversity on all 4 channels. So it's always able to make the best of what's coming into it. Rather than antenna switching, where you've just got one receiver and all you're doing is just changing the phase of one of the antennas relative to the other, which really doesn't give you any extra range, and you get clicking often and what have you. But with antenna diversity, you also, because it's actually got 2 receivers combined together, you actually also get 3 dB more sensitivity, because you're effectively pulling twice the amount of power, the amount of energy out of the out of the ether.
Yeah, incredible.
So yeah, if we go back to the computer screen here. Where did I get to? Yes, so diversity mode. RSSI is received signal strength. That's the classic way of doing it. You just say which antenna is giving the best signal strength. But you could also select it to be channel quality, which is actually giving the best quality of reception. As I say, I won't dwell too much on this because it could go on for a long time. So any questions, please ask. This is where in the audio settings, this is where you can change the audio output levels, change it between wide and narrow band, change the compander.
So basically, you've got in Manager, you've got all the functions and features that you can see in the menu on the product itself.
Correct.
They're all sitting there in Manager and making perhaps programming a little bit easier, prior to going on location and get yourself set up.
It's probably worth mentioning a few other things you can do in Manager. I mean, this is a very important one, which is firmware update. As I said, it's evolving all the time. The entire personality of the receiver is going to evolve over time, and the firmware updates are free and it's very easy to do over the USB-C connection. You can also do things like frequency scans. I can do a scan here if I select select that one and click scan. You'll see that's going to start to scan. It's like a spectrum analyzer, but a very, very sensitive and selective spectrum analyzer. So that's going to do a scan of the frequency range. Now, one of the things that's coming up, I can tell you in a firmware update that's really not far away now. I think it's picking up our radio mics there. So we've got some stuff going on next door as well, and some TV channels coming in. But yeah, one of the things that's coming up in soon to be launched software update or firmware update for the MCR54 is an auto scan where you can turn up and you can tell it which band you want to scan. So say you want to use between frequency A and frequency B. I want 16 channels, find them for me. It'll do that, and then it will also program the transmitters for you as well. So it like a complete, takes the worry away from setting all of that up. So yeah, that's the scan mode. Just clear that.
Just another question that's just come in, Piers, from Gary. Hi, Gary. Asking again to explain a little bit more about the compander settings. Now, this is something we have to remember that Wisycom and having multi-companding and being able to accept other people's transmitters is quite unique. So our friends there, well, not unique, but it's certainly a feature and function of Wisycom that maybe people aren't totally aware of. And we're getting a lot of questions on it this evening. Let's discuss about what does the companding do? How does the companding work, and why have different settings for different products?
Okay. Well, basically, a compander setting it's more. I would call it more a compatibility setting because it's not just the compander. It can be other parameters as well. Now, in order to get the best audio from microphone to mixer, obviously you want to minimize noise and maximize quality, basically. And in order to do that, in the same way as in the past for tape, you would have like Dolby B, Dolby C, various different methods, and DBX even. DBX is probably the closest thing to companders as used in wireless. Now, what you basically do, you take the dynamic range going into the transmitter from the microphone, which might be in the case of the Wisycom, it's huge. It's like over 100 dB. And you can't easily send that over an RF carrier. So what you do is you would reduce that, say by 2 to 1. So that 100 dB would become 50 dB, for instance. So you effectively make the loud sounds quieter and the soft sounds louder going in, and that then goes over the RF path. It goes into the receiver, and you do exactly the opposite. You make you pull the quiet sounds down and the loud sounds up. But that's not the only thing you have to do. There are things like attack and release time. I would imagine most people who are working in audio will understand the basis of a compressor, and a compressor will reduce. As the input level goes up, the output level goes up by a lesser amount than the input once you're above a threshold. So you've got to set the threshold at which point it takes effect. There's the attack and release time. In other words, how long it takes to react to a signal level going above the threshold and reduce it, or in the case of the expander, increase it. So all of these parameters, attack release time, threshold, need to be set. Then you've also got things like pre-emphasis and de-emphasis, which is where you emphasize high frequencies going into the transmitter and de-emphasize them, as in reduce high frequencies coming out. So there's quite a number of different parameters that need to match up. So it's probably, to call it a compander circuit. The compander is just the bit where you compress and then expand, but then there are other parameters as well that are specific.
It's a compatibility mode, really.
Yeah.
So that we've made sure that it's the receiver is there ready to accept transmissions from these choice of transmitters, and then give the sound in the best possible way, as
yes,
effectively mirroring the sound that manufacturer wanted from his
exactly.
transmitter, possibly improving. Who knows?
In an Electra or a Sennheiser or whatever, they're doing all of these things to the audio, and what you want to do in the receiver is do exactly the opposite of what's going on in the transmitter, and exactly the opposite, and at exactly the same time. So all the time constants and frequency transfer characteristics need to match up.
Okay. Anything more that we want to do on the manager, or shall we?
Unless anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, any questions on the manager, you can always come back in. And have we got a question coming in there? The same. Would the companding, say, between Electro and Sennheiser or Wisycom be similar in the NRIC? I guess what you're saying there is the audio output that you'll eventually get from a companded Electro or a native Wisycom transmitter. How do you think they would compare? So, we've said that we'd like to sort of try and match the sound that Electro would like to expect from their transmitters, which I think is probably a fair fact. You'll still know the difference between a companded Sennheiser and a Wisycom product, and these are all good quality products. Everything is going to give a good audio quality that you'd expect, but people have nuances that they like on different products.
I think I'm not sure what we're talking about here. Whether we're talking about the difference between an all Sennheiser system and an all Wisycom system, or the difference between a Sennheiser used with a Wisycom. And I can tell you for a fact that a lot of people have said that using a Sennheiser transmitter with Wisycom receiver actually sounds better than with a Sennheiser receiver. But these are things that I've heard.
It could be.
But it's very easy to match exactly what's being done in a Sennheiser, in a Shure, or in Audio Limited I mentioned. Because you can measure exactly what's being done and then program it. And once it's done in DSP, in the Wisycom, it can be done very, very accurately and very repeatedly, because the accuracy is only determined by the clock frequency accuracy, which is a few parts per million. So it's absolutely spot on. Whereas I think a lot of receivers that you might be using with older transmitters from other brands will do the companding in the analog domain, so it might not be as accurate because you're relying on the tolerance of components like capacitors and resistors, which could be quite a few percent, which is obviously a big difference from a few parts per million. So I think if that's what we're talking about, then the Wisycom can match exactly what other brands are doing. In terms of which sounds better between different companders, it's horses for courses. I mentioned Wisycom have got two compander modes, the ENR and ENC. The ENC is optimized for if you've got high frequency components. I don't know, like if you're doing a cookery program, for instance, and you've got pots and pans clanging, that can produce a lot of ultrasonic audio, which can cause issues. But actually, I think we're going to talk about transmitters in a moment, and I'm going to talk a bit about ultrasonic. So that's something else that has been that's been dealt with. But
and Peter, hi Peter, is saying the filtering. Is it tunable filtering? The tunable filtering happens more in the antennas and the RF management rather than the MCR.
Well, no, there's filters in the receiver tracking filters that tune along with the frequency. In the UHF range, they tune along with the frequency you're using. If you're using one of the other frequency ranges that are in there, which I didn't dwell on because they're of little relevance in Australia at this time, but in the case of DME, they have switchable SAW filters that give you sections of the band. SAW filters are a different kind of filter. SAW filter is a surface acoustic wave filter. They tend to have very flat pass bands, very sharp cut-offs, and they're appropriate where you've got very clearly defined bands. But where you're tuning the entire UHF spectrum, you wouldn't want a filter that let in the whole of 520 to 694 megahertz. You would want a filter that was narrower than that tracks.
So these filters are tunable within the product.
It's determined by what frequency you tune the receiver to. That will then automatically tune the filter to that frequency.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Where do we move now?
Transmitters. We probably ought to talk about
should we have a little chat about transmitters, because that's probably the other side of it. We'll grab a couple of these two here.
As you'll see, if you look on the links
try and
below,
get the closest picture of these.
There's a link to LEMAC, which has got some pricing on there, Australian pricing for kits, because we are selling the Wisycom receivers either on their own if you want to use them with your existing transmitters, or as kits if you want to get them with the Wisycom transmitters. So we sell them 4 transmitters.
2 transmitters. They actually look very, very similar. If you sort of hold them a little bit further away and further nearer to the camera, then they do. I think there is, yeah. Effectively, they are very, very similar. The key difference is the number of batteries. The MTP40 has 2 batteries. The MTP41 has, guess what? A single battery. Well, it doesn't have a single battery, it's not there, but that's where it would normally go.
More popular with film people, I guess.
It is a smaller format. It's a little bit sort of neater to put inside a sock or down anywhere particularly difficult to get a larger transmitter, and the film guys seem to like this. In reality, the difference in battery time now, in run time between the two products, is not hugely different anymore. Wisycom have optimised the battery usage on the MTP41 to get some really good time out of that single battery. An important point on the MTP40 is that it does allow in the menu for 100 milliwatt transmission, which the single battery unit doesn't. Yeah. So that's probably the key feature between the two.
I mean, for us in the UK here, that's not a huge amount of use because it's not allowed here, but in Australia and many other countries it is. So yes, if you want 100 milliwatts, you need the dual battery. To be honest with you, if you have a look at, I keep banging on about this walk test that we've done, but if you have a look at the range we were getting, that was done with 50 milliwatts, not with 100, because we're not allowed to run 100 milliwatts here, and I wasn't going to do a walk test running 100 milliwatts with Ofcom, the licensing people here watching, or whether they'd come and feel our, bang us up basically. But no, 50 milliwatts with such a sensitive receiver and such good filtering and such high performance, especially in narrowband, where effectively when you use them in the narrowband mode, 50 milliwatts has the equivalent range of 100 milliwatts anyway. Really, it begs the question whether you really need it. And obviously, if you do have it and you do run 100 milliwatts in narrowband, that's 200 milliwatts, perfectly legally, because you're only actually putting out.
That is actually showing through in the sales of these products. The MTP41 is starting to become the more popular product. It used to be the double battery MTP40, but I think people are trusting the battery life now. And as Pyers says, the 100 milliwatts is almost a little bit of an overkill in 99% of situations. So. The size of the 41, we know that talent and presenters don't actually like wearing radio packs at all, and if they do, let's try and make it as small as possible. Although I can see I'm wearing a 40 and finding it perfectly fine. So there's the transmitters. What else can we say about them?
It's not in your bra.
No. I decided to not wear my bra today. He doesn't wear a
bra, by the way, just in case anyone. No questions about that, please.
Never with a t-shirt. What else can we go through?
Well,
here?
I was just going to say a bit more about the transmitters. They have the same wide UHF tuning range as the receiver. In other markets, you basically have coverage all the way from 470 up to 700, but for the Australian market, it's locked to 520 to 694 megahertz. So one transmitter for the whole band. I mentioned about ultrasonic earlier on. Now, something that's been occurring more significantly of late is ultrasonic focus pullers are being used on cameras. Now, what that basically means is you've got these horn speakers blasting something like 130 dB at sort of above 30 kilohertz at your actors and talent in order to determine the distance for pulling the focus. Now, this has only become a big thing recently, so it's brought to light some issues that have occurred with transmitters, where effectively the microphones, I mean the lapel microphones like the one I'm wearing here, which is a DPA4060 in case anyone's interested, that basically is flat up to about 50 kilohertz, which obviously looks great on the spec sheet, but when you plug it into a transmitter, that's likely to overload the electronics. So what Wisycom have done is put an ultrasonic board, filter board into the transmitters, which basically all new transmitters coming into the Australian market will have that. And that effectively cuts off by 70 dB roughly the ultrasonic spectrum above 20 kilohertz to effectively remove the risk of this kind of interference. Obviously, if the overload happens in the microphone, if your chance is really close to the focus puller, you might have an issue there. So you still need to think about it, because obviously if the microphone itself is overloading, if it can't handle any more SPL at that frequency, there's nothing you can do, because it's bad coming out of the microphone. But that you'd have to be really, really close for that to be an issue. The other benefit of the ultrasonic filter board in here is that it allows you to switch on the transmitter between wide and narrow band, which is a feature it's a brand new feature that's just come out. So effectively you can choose then whether you want your transmitter to work in wideband mode or narrowband mode, which, as I said earlier on, gives you twice as many channels and about 40% more range. And you just have to make sure the transmitter and receiver are set to the same. But if you sync the receiver and transmitter together, it will make sure that that's the case for you.
Another question from Dong here. Thanks for your question. Transmitter microphone connection.
It's a Limo 3. Limo 3s are very popular out there. Like them or love them. They're most people like them from the point of view they're being very, very reliable and noise-free. Just really, really good connectors. They're not so easy as TAs to modify in the field, I guess, or repair in the field, but they are very reliable, and they're designed to fail very rarely. But I mean, the Limo is very popular, and I think it's used on many transmitters. Certainly the Sennheisers all use it. The newer electro transmitters also use it. So it's a common type of connector that you.
And Dong's also asking about 48 volt phantom power.
If you want 48 volt phantom power, well, there's an MTB40, which is the plug-on, which actually we don't have here to show you, but Wisycom do a plug-on that has 48. If you want to use 48 volt with this, there is a PHA48 adapter, which takes a low voltage out of the TA socket, sorry, not the TA, the Limo socket on the transmitter, and converts that to 48 volts, and also gives you transformer balancing and everything. So there is an option to use this with 48 volts, but only with a PHA48 adapter. Or alternatively, there are other manufacturers. I mean, Ambient spring to mind in Germany, which we also sell in the UK, that also provide a 48 volt inline phantom adapter. So there are options available for that, but it's not native within. I think the main reason for that is battery life, because although the milliamperage used by microphones looks very low on their spec sheets, a few milliamps at 48 volts is quite a lot of milliwatts. If anyone knows Ohm's law, they'll be able to work that one out themselves. But it's effectively means that the microphone then will cause the battery to run out in like a couple of hours, depending on which microphone you use and how much current it's drawing. So that's the reason they don't do this. Because I mean, it's worth mentioning that the twin battery Wisycom will run something like 14 hours on a pair of batteries. So yeah, they didn't want to compromise it by putting the 48 volt within there. And also the other issue is noise. In order to generate 48 volts within a pocket transmitter, you need to use what's called a switch mode inverter, which basically chops the DC at a very high frequency, an ultrasonic frequency, and then effectively transforms it up to a higher, because you can only change voltages if they're AC, so you have to convert it to AC, chop it at a high frequency, and then convert it to a high voltage. What happens then is you've got ultrasonic noise, you've got RF noise, all kinds of stuff going on in there. So it's best to keep that out of the transmitter itself.
Another question from Rick. Audio input dynamic headroom?
Yes, that's a good question. The Wisycom MTP40 and 41S have a limiter in them, which has something like, I think, a 30 dB range, if memory serves me correctly, and the audio level setting range on the transmitter is 80 dB again, if memory serves me correctly. If I may be proved wrong when someone looks suspect, I think it's 80, and that effectively means you can go from low level mic right up to plus 20 dB out of a line level out of a mixer with one setting without having to put attenuators in line or anything like that. So it has a huge dynamic range, and with the limiter in, I mean most sound recorders, I mean certainly for my own purposes, I would never really want to process the audio actually during the recording process of actually recording the ISOs. I would want to do that later. So you would set the limiter just if you've got an actor who suddenly screams, or a presenter who's, you know, I don't know, you're doing a motoring show and suddenly they scream because the car goes really fast or something. You would just want that not to clip the input. So that's the limiter will give you about 30 dB of protection from that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
I've forgotten what the question was now. I went on for so long.
Any more about the transmitters? I think we've probably covered what we need to cover.
I think so.
On those.
Yeah.
And as Pyers mentioned earlier on, the plug-on transmitter, which we should have had one here, is an addition to that range. And we also have a handheld transmitter as well, clearly compatible with all the other Wisycom products. Should we talk? I mean, talking about compatibility. Let's talk about compatibility with other accessories. You know, when you're taking your MCR54 into the field, particularly if it's fitting in with the super slot bass, which we know is now compatible with lots and lots of different new products. What have we got in the way of distribution carrier products that could work with the MCR54?
I mean, I guess if you know, if 4 channels in a receiver that size isn't enough, by putting it into a third-party slot device, you can get up to 12 channels in a very, very small, lightweight bag setup that's friendly to your back, and so you save on your osteopath bills and all that kind of stuff. So there are options. At the moment, there are some legacy products. There's the PSC 6-pack, which I think we've got a picture of here. That's from PSC in the States. It's a relatively low-cost accessory. It has RF distribution built in, and that enables you to have all basically 4 channels per receiver. So that's 12 channels in a 3-slot coming out if you use AES. There's the SL6 from Sound Devices, which has been around a little while now. That at the moment is not compatible with all 4 channels of audio. If you want to use all 4 channels of audio per receiver, you need to take channels 3 and 4 out of the top socket on the MCR54. Simply because, or I think actually, if you use AES, it will come out of the side.
Yeah, can we just dwell on that, because I don't know how much we mentioned earlier on about the top outputs on the MCR54.
Well, I think I mentioned when we were going through the menu. You've got you can have AES at the bottom, and
it's under that little rubber cap there, isn't it? I think you can see there you've got your TA5 on the top.
So that can be 2 analog channels, or it can be all 4 channels if you select AES.
Yeah, super.
So going back to Sound Devices, the SL2, there's a picture of an SL2 with a couple of MCR54s in it. That basically gives you 8 channels of audio, and that's completely designed from the ground up to work with the Wisycom MCR54, and it's compatible with the Sound Devices 8 series mixers and also the Scorpio, and the compatibility extends to being able to run scans on your mixer and set channels from your mixer, and even if you've got the Wisycom active antennas, which I think we're going to mention sort of near the end, which have got filtering in, you can change the filter frequency and tune the filter frequency and change the gain in the antenna, also all via the MCR54 through the SL2. Now I think the SL2 is the start of a new range of products from Sound Devices compatible with their mixers that will enable you to get huge amounts of channels in a very, very small footprint. And as I say, the remote control is something that can't be overstressed, because you can effectively, instead of having to go to each receiver and make adjustments, you can just do it all via the mixer. So that really improves the workflow there.
Superb, superb. Yeah, let's talk a bit about RF distribution. We were going to talk about the antenna. Which,
well, I mean, the standard antennas, obviously, you get with the MCR54, you get a couple of whips. Boing. They're fine for most circumstances in a bag. I mean, we've had like 200 plus meter range with the receiver in a bag on the shoulder with a mixer running. No problem at all. But if you want to get a better range, there are there's this is one example. They do an omnidirectional one as well. This is the LFA, which is a wide tuning range antenna. It actually does 410 to 1200 megahertz. So it also does the new frequency bands I was talking about earlier on. But it's an LPGA, so it's a log periodic antenna. So it has the same performance you would get from most antennas. It gives you a 6 dB actual antenna gain, but it's also got a variable gain, so you can take gain out if you want. If you want to throw gain away, if you've got like an overload situation, if you've got somebody with a walkie-talkie standing right next to you, or you've got up to 27 dB of gain. Now 27 dB of gain is unprecedented, to be honest. I mean, that's equivalent if you're using a typical low loss RF cable such as LMR400, which is one that I particularly recommend. That's about, at normal UHF frequencies, that's about 1 dB per 10 meters. So that effectively means you can compensate for the loss in 270 meters of cable in this. And it also has tunable filters that tune a 40 megahertz range across the whole UHF spectrum. And as I said, that is remote controllable also from the sound devices mixer if you're using it in their SL2, or I think the SL6 is compatible. I could be wrong, but certainly the SL2 is compatible with that. So if you are 270 meters away from the antenna, being able to change the settings on it without having to walk 270 meters is probably quite handy.
Even if 30-40 meters away, it's really going to work and be very useful. Yeah, that's the LFA. And then you have the ADFA, which is the omnidirectional.
There's an
exactly the same. As somebody did mention earlier on about working like the LFA filter, you may have seen this as an individual filter by itself, but
yes, there's a BFA. It's worth mentioning, as well as the omnidirectional. There's a BFA, which is just the amplifier and filter section from that antenna. If you want to use an existing antenna, for instance, and it's remote controllable, just the same, has the same filtering, has the same gain control range that I just mentioned. So that is another option. And obviously you can use it with any other antenna if you've got, like Lectrosonic's SNA 600, for instance, great little antenna. It works perfectly with that. Betso bow tie, the new kid on the block. That a lot of people have been using them with that so far. So yeah, antenna options are myriad. Or of course, there's no reason why you can't use it with any other brand of antenna, because RF is RF.
Yeah.
So yeah, you don't have to use a particular brand of antenna with a particular brand of receiver.
Okay.
Some people do ask that, believe it or not.
Well, I think we've covered pretty much the MCR54 and what you need to know about it. If there's any other questions, you can always be in contact with Limac or with Quinn and Rob down in Raycom Pacific, or even ourselves here. Somebody's always going to be able to answer those questions for you. Something we want to talk about now is something that's a little bit in the future, not too far in the future. It's not going to be next year maybe, or maybe towards the end of this year. I think we're going to see prototypes, and it's a product called the MRK16. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
I feel we should have a fanfare for it. Actually.
We should do it.
We'll
have a fanfare for it when it actually arrives in our warehouse. But,
to be honest, we expected to have it by now, but they keep raising the bar and developing new things for it that have meant now that it's become something kind of, you'd almost imagine that it was something you'd dream about, because it has so many features. I think we got a photo of it, haven't we? Oh, we haven't got a photo.
We've been let down with the photo,
okay.
You have to use imagination here. But
what I'll do, actually, there is some information about it. I will post a link to it in the description of this, which will continue to be available online, obviously, once we've finished prattling on. I'll put a link to it. But the MRK16 is a Wisycom produced one new rack with slots for three MCR54, 3 slots for MCR54s. Basically, that gives you sorry, 4. Let me start again. If I was looking at the photo, it'd be like easier.
It's so much easier to see the 4 slots with the photo.
4 slots, 16 channels in a one new rack. Not even very deep, quite a shallow rack. Obviously, in a cart system or even in a bag. I mean, having 16 channels in a tiny one new slot is pretty amazing. It has analog AES Dante outputs. It also has RF distribution built in. It uses the bottom RF connector on the MCR54, so you don't have to plug loads of SM. That's Massimo. He's the
guy that's designed it.
So. Yes, I'm learning it. This is probably another feature he's just added.
Well, he's just retracted the message actually, so maybe. Maybe you'd like to have it with power over Ethernet.
Okay, so what else has it got? It's got you've got a load of D types on the back with the analog outputs, or Dante, as I mentioned, dual and main and redundant Dante, Ethernet, full remote control and monitoring. It's got again programming of antennas over Ethernet, so you can remote control the antennas that way, and possibly. Something that might prove to be one of its biggest features is the ability to fit a module in the back that enables it to receive RF over fibre. That basically means you could have a very, very long run of fibre to remote antennas using the Wisycom MFL based system, and basically run a fibre straight into the rack, and that enables you effectively to have your receivers far remote from where the antennas are, and as I say, run fibre instead of coax. You plug fibre in, just single fibre for all 16 channels or more, because you can actually daisy chain these MIK16s. They've got an RF loop, so you could have 32. You could have 32 channels, and obviously you can go on from there. But yeah, so a fibre input. But the fibre input is in addition to a local input. I think I mentioned there were 2 inputs, so you can select antenna A or antenna B, or it could be antenna A and RF over fibre on B, for instance. So that's a pretty big deal.
MRK16 coming soon.
Yes, the MIK16
hopefully.
Please do take a look at the link below.
See a physical one.
It's worth looking at, I promise you, and it's going to be. I mean, a real. I mean, everything we were talking about here, I think, is a game changer. It's not. It's one of those phrases I really hate people using it willy nilly, but. Yeah. A 4-channel receiver with the kind of performance that you get from this in this size and at the price point that it's at is just astonishing. And likewise, the way it's going to change the way people work, I think, is truly amazing. And then once the MIK16 comes along, again, that's another step change in the way you work.
It's a major product, alongside the MCR54. The ability to take your bag receivers. Although you're probably going to have less bag receivers now because there's so many channels in them, but just to be able to get them and put them into a studio rack scenario simply by just unplugging and plugging in, incredible stuff, really. And exciting new ways to work. There's been a few other questions coming in while we were talking about the MCR54.
Last chance for questions, by the way, because we're almost at the end of our list here.
Getting towards the end. We want to take up all of YouTube's capability. Patrick again is saying, thanks Patrick, it was some people can claim certain companda modes being mismatched from TX-RX as reducing background noise. If you follow the question
I
there.
Sort of follow the question. There's a couple of things I would mention. There is a companda mode that wasn't in this menu but is available, which is actually the expander doesn't fully expand the audio from the transmitter. So if you're using the Wisycom setup, effectively the dynamic range is reduced by a small amount, and that is very useful if you're going into a DSLR, for instance, and you're using the audio input on the DSLR, which has generally very, very poor dynamic range. Effectively, you're compressing the audio slightly, but it's virtually inaudible. Otherwise, I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about, Patrick. I think maybe some people have found that using mismatched companders might produce a desirable effect in certain circumstances. So I'm just wildly guessing here. But in general, if you're going to fiddle around with the dynamics in some way, it's best to do it in post. Although I realise that the way people's workflow is in these days, often that just doesn't happen. ISOs are there, but just never even get touched. But so yeah, I can kind of get that. But I would say the time when you do really want to mess around with the dynamics is if you're recording onto a medium that is really restricting your dynamic range, such as I say going in on a 3.5mm unbalanced socket on the side of a DSLR. And at that point, you would use this special commander mode, which I would imagine is available on the MCR54. It's not on the one we've got here, but as I say, we're in the very early stages of the MCR54, and to use the Tesla analogy again, what you buy now isn't necessarily what it's going to be in a year's time. It's going to be something much, much better. Yeah,
it's interesting stuff. Great. Okay. Well, I think we're coming towards the end of today's presentation.
How long have we gone on?
Yeah, we've been here.
If you've been here from the start, thank you very much.
You're well
Give
done.
yourselves a medal.
Well, let's talk about where this product is going to be and its availability, because you may have seen this and think, fabulous, I'd love to get some of this. I believe that we've got MCR54 in kit format landing in Australia with Limac.
Towards the end of this month,
towards the end of this month,
next month.
So,
there's only a limited amount.
Coming soon.
Wisycom are drip feed because as you can imagine, with a product this good, there's been fantastic demand. I mean, we had an allocation in the UK of 100, which we sold out in very in a couple of weeks. So we've got a very small allocation coming to Australia. They're having to drip feed them as production ramps up. With any new product, it takes a while to get production.
Yeah, and this time will pass. I mean, we can look back in 6 months' time, and there'll be free availability of the product, I'm sure. But there is limited availability now, and I know that Wisycom are trying to spread this around as much as they can to meet the demands where they've got it. So
this is where we start to sound like QVC, isn't it?
Yeah, we do a little bit. Yeah, how many we sold?
You'll lose out.
Yeah,
but if you do want one sort of fairly quickly, I wouldn't hang around because
we should have a telephone number going across the bottom. Something like that. Yeah, that'd be good. But time is going on. It's getting towards our lunchtime, and I think you're still lucky enough to have pubs open in Australia. So it's getting towards pub time. Actually, if it was here at your time now, it's actually getting towards the closing of our pub's time, because they all close at 10 o'clock now.
Yes.
Which is doing me the world of good, to be fair.
And it's also why Andy and I have been standing so far apart, obviously. Cause
we try and keep a place, but we are working in a work bubble, so we're allowed to actually be in the same room at the same time in this very strange world that we live in. So, look, it remains for us to thank you for watching, obviously. To thank Limac and the guys there for helping us support this event and putting the invites out and getting it spread as wide as possible, and to Quinn and Rob at Raycom Pacific, for the great efforts they're making down. Any other questions you've got? We're still here, and obviously all the guys I've just mentioned are there ready to take your questions, and looking forward to talking to you more about Wisycom in the near future. So it's
and as I say, check out the links below. And as I said, I'm going to add some info on the MRK16 within the next hour, I should think. So check out the links.
Great, and great evening, and stay safe, as they say these days. Thanks.